Hello and welcome to April 27th. I'm almost trying to get it out there.
I
Edition of
think
the
you just want to slide into May, but that's
There
all
you
right.
go. May's my month. That's my jam. But an April 27th edition of the MSP Initiative Live. Of course, the normal housekeeping we normally do at the beginning of all of these calls, mspinitiative.com. This is where everything that we're doing is kind of out and in front. So you'll see sessions. This session and every other session we've ever done is in podcast and video format here. Usually after we're done recording at some point. We have our MSP Community Minds event. This is going to be in Denver, August 14th and 15th. We already have a bunch of speakers, including the person that's on this call today, signed up for this. There's going to be a few more that's added. We're doing an event for the community. It's free for MSPs to join us other than you getting yourself there. And we're hoping to take a little bit of a workshop style model to this so that you walk away with actually something started rather than the idea of something. And so we'll do a little bit more about this as we get closer, but definitely circle these dates and start looking for, flights. And we'll have a room block available for you guys for you to join us in Denver. We have many block parties. One that I noticed is missing out of the menu, but we have one coming up in a week and a half in Prague for the Enable Empower event in Europe. Behind that, we have the DattoCon Dublin event in the end of June. We have the MSP Community Boat Party, which is tied to the Taylor Business Group, big in August. We have what's missing out of this list, and hopefully somebody's taking a note. The DattoCon Miami event in, I believe, October. And then we have the final one in Orlando to cap out the year. This was the one where we brought the All-American Rejects in. There's a lot of debate internally on who comes behind them, but I promise you it will be a band that you've heard of both on the radio and by name before. We have some community offers, which I have a couple that are yet to be posted, but basically companies that are offering kind of special promos to the community. And lastly, an industry calendar so that you can see what's coming up if you haven't already understood all of these crazy events that are happening out in MSP land, hopefully all in one place. If we're missing any, feel free to submit them and we're happy to add them to the list. That was a mouthful. So welcome to the show. Of course, we bring a familiar face back. We've heard our friend Mr. Patterson here throughout the history of the MSP Initiative podcast here and webinars. How you doing today, Ken?
I am living the dream.
Absolutely
Glad to be back on the show. I got my nice little backdrop in here and ready to rock and roll, George.
Okay, all right. Not karaoke today.
No karaoke. You gotta be in person to see that. Lots of videos, but we put them on. We gotta cork those because you gotta come out and see them live.
Got it. Gotta get out of the
Another reason to come to Community Minds in Denver because there is a spot out there that's in my heart.
I'm sure there will be. So you're at Taylor Business Group now. I know we said that before. So how are things going over at Taylor?
Things are going fantastic. That my choice, I took my time making this choice and finding a company that was best suited to serve the community because of obviously where I land with the community, being an ex-MSP and trying to stay on the side of the MSP and make sure that I was in a spot where whoever I went to was representing the MSP well. And Taylor was one of those companies that surprised me. I didn't know as much as I thought I knew about them until we dug in a little bit deep. And, the biggest introduction did come from you, George. So, thank you for that. You did chase down Michael, which we all know is sometimes difficult to do to make those connections. But when I finally did, I found a company that is helping MSPs get to the next level. And that's what I'm all about. So it's another easy step in where I can step in, talk comfortably to my MSP brothers and sisters about how they can be helped in a key area, finances, which is always the toughest. area, and they have some great benchmarking tools in place. There's also a SaaS tool that helps monitor and keep track of all the things that you're doing. But being able to take your business from that level where, hey, I'm just an engineer and I fix stuff, to holy crap, I actually run a business and I have things to take care of, and finances being the key piece of that, um, is really important and part of so much of what I care about. And obviously people like Brett Mesh and Danny Perry, people in the community who came to me and said, hey, I'm already at Taylor, you should talk to them, would love to have the community piece added in there, for what we do, to let everybody know how great it is. And you watch some of these guys, their growth over the last few years has been absolutely insane. And then another number that I'm pressing to get, because I'll put it up on the screen when we get them, but they had 3 or 4 companies, maybe more, that I know of, that had an acquisition event. And when they went through the process, they had a higher multiple than anybody from an industry standard. And to me, that's really important, right? Because you want to build to that. Even if you're not going to sell your company, you should always be building it like you are, right? Because you're going to still have that efficiency level and operating at a high level and being above the benchmarks for the industry. And this just proved it out. So just some cool stats. You know me, I don't like to talk much about the company itself. I like to talk about the solutions and what the actual positive impact was. And that's just a few things that had me really comfortable about landing at Taylor, because I can just step right in and do what I do best. And that's enable and help and talk to MSPs about how they can do this. And it's not super expensive. And you get into a group where people are holding you accountable. And also Taylor has facilitators to help roll through the meetings and make sure that you're being held accountable. So it's more than a peer group. That's one thing we do. Like, that's where big, right? They're business improvement groups, because you do have the facilitator and you do have accountability. And everybody that I've talked to and worked with has explained to me how much better they've gotten from day one to the point they're at now. And there's always a plan.
Yeah, I was talking to John Katz from Purple Guys.
Yeah.
They're one of the, I don't know, 24 platform companies out there that have, VC or PE or investment money behind them, and they're going out there and acquiring. And John was saying just yesterday that maybe one of the best things, and he's not even in your peer group, he's in a peer group, right? I would recommend anyone find a peer group, right? And take a look at Taylor as part of your evaluation. But he was saying that was one of the things that, he can attribute in the top 1, 2, 3 things during his career so far that kind of catapulted his company forward.
Right.
And he said that it's not just, the more formal part, it's kind of the informal part, right? How are you doing this? What's working, right? You're kind of learning from people who are already in the trench like you, and figuring out, hey, do I want to go the hard way, or has somebody already gone through this, and can I fast track to a better place, right? So, and I know I've said this 1,000 times, I'll probably say it another 1,000. There's the trench and mode and castle mentality that seems to still exist in this industry. Maybe the reason that's the case is because a large amount of the 80, 100, 150,000 MSPs, depending on who you talk to, never leave their office or their house, basement, or whatever it is. I feel like if you get into the community aspect of the IT channel, this is when you start to realize that, there's a lot of other people out there in the same boat, and you can learn from, the experiences of others rather than you doing it the hard way yourself. And by the way, I'm the guy who learned the hard way. I'll be honest with you. I spent a long time just getting punched in the face, and Rocky edition, until I was like, man, this hurts. I got to do something different. This is not good.
Listen, it's probably one of the toughest industries to be in, right? It's one of the hardest industries to be in. There's so many, and now just to add in cybersecurity, forget it. You can't go it alone. You just can't go it alone. And you should be talking to other MSPs, and you should be networking with other MSPs. It's a higher percentage of MSPs that don't care about your business and aren't trying to steal from you. They would much rather learn from you. And I guarantee you, a lot of times, and I've done this, I was a little hesitant at first back in the day when I was doing this. And again, I'm a little bit further back, right? I sold my MSP 12 years ago. So, but even back when it was even more prevalent, someone kicked me in the pants, and it was someone in my network of MSPs that said, "What are you doing?" And then when I went and actually started talking to the one MSP that I was really scared of in my community, it turned out not only did we have a lot in common, but there were things that they didn't do that we did, and vice versa. And we started working together. And you got to start to feel, obviously there are some that you have to be careful of, but there are red flags that you can look out for. Most MSPs nowadays are not going down that unethical road. They have too much to do. Right. They're not going to do the castle mentality because they know how hard it is. And when we work together, that's where things get done. And that's where I learned. I attribute everything that I learned along the way from being an engineer, just starting at an MSP, or it wasn't even an MSP at the time, IT service provider at the time, to now, was all due to that networking. And by the way, people say, oh, the drinking or the whatever, or hanging at the bar or whatever. Gotta be honest, the late nights, there's some, craziness and fun, sure. But a lot of the conversations happen then because people are a little looser and they want to chat. And you start talking about problems and people start to actually open up. So, don't rule that out either. Like, go to events, talk to people, stay up a little later, have karma. You might even get pizza at the end of the night with George, who knows? But doing these types of things and getting to know people in the community and around the community just makes you so much better. I mean, I would have never met the people that I've met. I would have never met you, George. I wouldn't have met, a lot of the people that we've met along the way with the groups, Keith Nelson, right? You just wouldn't have met all these people if you're not putting yourself out there and open to, hey, I'm going to say this, and I might get walloped because I'm doing it wrong. But guess what? A lot of times, most of us will say, yeah, that's not how I would do it. And then have the conversation. You don't really get beat up that much.
I think, let's be
Except
honest.
you wouldn't have met me if we didn't have cigars, not the pizza.
That's part of the late night routine.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's an all-day routine, George.
Your alcohol of choice, your cigars, and maybe a karaoke play. So, well, I've had the, pretty rare opportunity and thankful that I've been able to travel as much as I've been able to, across my time. But having talked to MSPs even out of the country, right? Like in Europe and the UK and down under in Australia and New Zealand, like there are some really clever people that have attacked this industry, this business model in a way that maybe you haven't thought of before. Some of it may be the maturity of things. Some of that may be that they're just really clever and they've come up with something new. Some of it may just be, that some of the more, I don't know, geographical differences, right? And by the way, the MSP industry is like, I'd say 85% is homogenous across the board, right? And then you get the localization effect of things are done just a little bit differently depending on where you are in the world. But
right,
it's amazing how, being willing to share, which I know is hard for people who in technology may not be the most outgoing people, right? And then being willing to not be afraid to ask questions can come back with some really interesting results.
Well, of course. I mean, like I said, everything I learned as I did presentations, that not a single thing in that presentation came out of my brain. It was all things that I picked up being at events and said, this is really good stuff. I'm just going to throw it out there and see if it helps somebody. And then I have people coming up to me saying, wow, that was really cool. I'm going to try that. And it's like, yeah, that's what I did. That's how I found out about it. And, I mean, look, George, Northeast guys, we're a little gruff. We're a little direct. But it wasn't, it's so don't, when people say to me, well, how did you come up with how to fire people in such a nice way? I didn't come up with that. Someone taught me that it's much easier to deal with people and companies and things when you do it from a different angle. And, when I fired that customer that I told you about, right, I had the two guys that were beating up my team, and I didn't realize that I was just taking the money in. And then I was like, oh, I can't let these guys abuse my people. I went in personally, and I didn't just say, hey, you're fired, hit the bricks. I found them somebody else. I was very nice about it. I said we were just going in two different directions, and it turned out to be the best thing I ever did. And from that, I learned how to do that in the future in different ways. So I wasn't just doing the Northeast, you're fired and you're out, hit the bricks type of mentality. And I think that over time, when things like that worked for me, I wanted to learn more. I wanted to talk to people more. And I think that's a really cool feeling to have when you realize, hey, guess what? It's not just me against the world. I have a team of people. I have a network of people, hundreds, thousands now of people that if I have an issue, I can pick up the phone and just throw something out there and I'm going to get a little help. Folks like, Henry Tim and Matt Lee, and there's a lot of people around the industry that just give help without any expectations. And that's what community is all about, by the way. Community is about giving help without expecting something in return, right? It's not about having customers, right? Those customers have to be stark raving fans, as Eric Bowles says. So from that perspective, take that however you want to take it. But you have a network of people here who are willing to help. Use them. Take their advice. Don't just nod your head and go back and get back in the weeds, and because you're going to get the same result.
Well, that hopefully we're trying to break that trend with community
Right.
mind a little bit, right? Like,
Yep.
I can't tell you how many, and pick them, right? Whether DattoCon, IT Nation, any breakout regional event. I mean, there's so many that I can remember, and I'm like, oh, that was a great idea, and I like started taking notes, and and then I was like, oh, 6 months later, I ran into the backpack that they gave you, and you start pulling out everything, and you're like, oh, yeah, I didn't do any of that stuff.
Ken, there's an old saying that has to do with people that don't want to learn from others. The dumbest person in the room is the one that can't learn from the stupid.
That's a good one. That's
Yeah.
good.
True.
So I'm thinking about some of the things that I learned, over my time, right? That I learned from, and I would say I learned more, the hard way in the very, in probably about half of my career. And then I flipped the other way and said, man, I got a fast track past this stuff. And here's the problem. I don't care whether you went through formal education, MBA, there's all these business courses. Some of this stuff is just the business model specific, right? Like you're just not going to get taught this in, a formal kind of educational setting, right?
Oh, George, throw it back to your example. Come on.
Which
The example, Rodney Dangerfield, back to school.
Back to school.
Right?
Yeah, well, that was funny. I actually brought that up the other day. Remember in that movie, and if you haven't watched it, please go. It's a classic. But where he goes back to school with this kid, and he's in this business class, and the professor's talking about, here's what we have to do to build a factory. And the guy's like, you're missing the VIG for the union, the payoff for the city council, this, that. And I'm like, he's not wrong. But
the professor shoots him down and says, no. And you're right. The things you learn in school are not necessarily the applications you can learn in the real world.
Yeah, it's so true. And
it's a foundation.
I think part of the problem is that a lot of, there's like 3 different avenues of how people get into this industry, right? A, they've already worked for another company and decide to break out on their own, right? B, they were in maybe another field, right? Maybe even an internal IT somewhere else, something like that. And they kind of fall down into it, right? Because, that didn't work out. And lastly, like they just switched careers altogether, right? And just kind of started. Generally, those are the 3 lanes, unless you think I'm wrong or if I've missed something. The problem is that nobody gives you the cheat sheet to the business side, right? You can fix computers, you can put in networks, you can, learn the SaaS approach, the cloud approach, now security, like can't avoid it, have to have a plan, like all of this stuff, right? But like the nuts and bolts of the everyday business pieces, I feel like that's the part that people ultimately get jammed up on.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's funny. It's not just one or 2 things, right? There's a lot, because everybody always says, oh, MSPs really fall down on sales and marketing. Sure. And they also fall down on operations, finance. There's so many aspects of a business that you have to think about.
Hiring,
right. HR, right. Exactly. Right. There's no way you could do them all, first of all. So early on, delegation is a big deal. And most of us are only thinking about, well, I got to delegate tech work. Guess what? You also have to start delegating the stuff that you really don't know much about. The other things we just mentioned, some way, shape, or form, you have to plug people into those, and you have to feel safe to do that. You have to understand how to do that, and by the way, I've seen it happen in a couple of different businesses. Hire the wrong person and don't learn enough about finance, especially, or accounting. You can get robbed pretty quickly and not have any clue what's happening. We've seen it happen with many businesses, not just in the IT world, but I think it's more prevalent in the IT world because of the fact that we concentrate on fixing the broken stuff, as opposed to the actual business itself.
I
So,
think you're so accurate. I think so often we think technology is the key to everything. And if you look at the cycles, right now where there's layoffs, who's the first one that gets canned? The IT guys, because they're a cost center. And until you switch to being a business asset, you're a cost center. And I think we rely too much on the red cape we think we have because we're so smart with our technology, and forget about what the C-suite cares about, which is how do you make the business run better? And sometimes they're mutually exclusive, and sometimes they're a fight. You're putting in the technology because you don't understand the workflows and the process that's actually disruptive to the business. You may be protecting them, but you're going like, the way you implement it, you're being disruptive. And
I think, well, I'm actually thinking about what you're saying here, Keith, but like in the early days of setting up my company, my goal was, how do I make it as easy as possible for the customer to interact, right? And so I was jumping through hoops to make it, seem simple to them, even though it was kind of complicated in a lot of ways. But the problem, that's easy to do when you're small, right? You start scaling to any degree, and now you can't do that across all of your customers, and it starts to like unfold a little bit.
right.
you can, because it's very profitable.
Yeah.
It's when you get away from what we laugh about all the time. Do you make $500 an endpoint? No, I don't want to cut my rates, because you're selling a commodity. You might as well walk in the office to your prospects with your Kmart blue light and start talking about price. When you take the time to invest in the workflow, and the example I always give is, I hear people, my customer won't do two-factor authentication. And I say, because that's the stupidest thing to sell. How about selling a single sign-on where they can have all their applications listed and easily move from one to another without having multiple logons? They go, what's that? I go, single sign-on. However, when you sell it as a security thing, they think, oh, here's the guy that sold me Symantec or McAfee years ago, and now he's got a new toy he's playing with. When you just say, I'm improving your workflow, and they go, well, that saves me money. That helps me deliver. And I'm not sure, and I understand the idea of making it easiest for the customer, and that's one thing. I always think we got to make it pleasant for the customer. We have to make it a real good experience. And that's why when a different argument, when some people talk about KPIs and I want my text to jam through calls, and I go, no, I'd rather have them say, how's your kids? How's it going over there? And then getting under the covers and finding out, oh, where they're expanding. You might want to get in here and talk to people.
Well, it always should be a business discussion, not a technology discussion, right? And then of course, the experience piece comes with that connection that you're creating with them, because obviously people talk to people they like to talk to, and they're going to, get past that whole, you're right, someone's trying to sell me the next shiny toy in their toy box, and I get that 100%. And I think beyond that, it's just, I really believe the whole industry, vendors, MSPs, I've said this all the time, is we need to stop complicating pieces of this. Sales and marketing, it's not as difficult as you make it out to be. Yes, it's something that we don't understand, but I don't think everybody, I think everybody thinks that certain people get it more than others, like vendors understand it. And I don't know that vendors really understand it. I think they're still sticking to some pretty old ideas, right? And they're still rolling things out in an old fashion. And You know, I say it all the time. George knows I say it all the time. I think the sales techniques are still good because you have to help people get out of their own way. So you still have to use that psychology of sales piece where, you know, I can ask the right questions of George, and then all of a sudden he's laying on the couch and telling me everything about his life. Right now, I can say, okay, what's really bothering you, and get to that point. You still need that stuff, but what you don't need is the sales approach. You shouldn't have to sell what you have. That's where you commoditize it. Like you said, Keith, it should be you have business problems and I have solutions to those problems, and applying the solutions to those problems, it makes everything easier to have the conversation. I know the MSPs out there would appreciate that if the vendors took that approach and it was much more conversational instead of confrontational, which it is now. I mean, you look at the space, look at social media, it explodes with, oh, this guy from company X called me again today. And it's like, why? Why do you feel like that? Where is that pressure coming from? It's because they've been abused over and over again by vendors who say they want to help them, but spend all their time beating them up. So yeah, there's got to be a shift in all of this to make it easier so that MSPs who already have so much on their plates can have an easier time if they see their phone ring and they go, oh, it's George from BVoIP. Well, I'm going to talk to this guy. And he's going to give you no BS and just, hey, if you're doing this, great. If you're not doing it, great. Just want to give you a heads up. Conversation goes smoother, and then you know that's what needs to change completely. And it's right to your point, Keith. Right? It's got to be about the solutions, not the technology.
Well, if you know, listen, the vendor conversation surely goes into a slightly different road, but I feel like there's, you know, if you're not, how do you get the information and knowledge that you need out of a vendor without being in the same space? I think it's very difficult, right? I mean, let's face it, not a lot of people are learning through the screen at this point, right? And the virtual event, I think, is, you know, largely met a little bit of its demise, right? So like, other than, you know, you going to look for information and hoping that the search engines or Chat GPT, if that's what you're using today, gives you the right answer, you know, like, isn't it better to actually find out who's using what and what their experience is if you don't want to engage directly? I think that's the better approach.
Oh, absolutely. Sure. You should be talking to the people who are actually getting the experience, right? How is your experience with company X? How's your experience with company Y? But you should also dig a little deeper because, you know, if I say to just your average MSP, I ask that question and they just go, they suck. And I say, oh, okay, I'm not using them. That's not also how it works either, George, right? Because you know as well as I do, it goes deeper. If someone just says, oh, it sucks because I tried to use an NFP or NFR version of a piece of software that I wasn't supposed to use, and then when I went to get support, it didn't work. Well, that sounds like a you problem, not a vendor problem, right? So you do have to dig a little bit, George, deeper than just asking what your experience is. Well, really, what was your experience, to make sure it aligns with the things that you might do, because this is a two-way street. As MSPs, we have to get better at working with them too. So I see both sides of that, but you make sure you're asking the right questions if you're going to ask somebody about a vendor. And then of course, if you know you've done everything and the company's dumped all over it, or you know made you sign a contract that you weren't ready for, or you know bumped your price, you know, a significant amount. I mean, let's face it, we had people complaining about a 10% hike on something that was a very minimal charge. I don't see what the problem with that is, unless it was, you know, completely from out of space. But
well, I mean, listen, there's two sides of the coin, right? First, I want to talk to the person in the organization that actually evaluated the solution, right, and was working with it. The check signer of every organization isn't necessarily the person in the back, you know, lab kind of think, right? So that's number one. Number two, is the help there? Is the resources there? Do I have the assistance I need to not have to learn this thing by learning another language? Is half of it. And the other half is like the actual business model. I feel like that's what ends up on the Reddits and the Discords,
right.
And all those other groups, right? It's like, well, you know, the terms change. Well, you know, I read the contract, read it, actually read it, ask the questions, put them in writing. Hey, what happens if? And like that way you're not surprised later on. I think that's number one. Number two, you need to make sure that, and I know it's hard, right? Because companies seem to be getting acquired or merging pretty regularly these days, especially on this side of the aisle. But you need to be able to understand what your avenues of help are, right? And I know like a lot of companies, right, they put a lot of attention in the beginning, and then after like you've got through that implementation onboarding period,
Right.
like, where do you go? What are your resources, right? Or hey, I don't even know who I'm supposed to be talking to. Who's my rep? Who's my contact? Am I just talking to a chatbot, right? So these are questions that, and there's been a lot of conversation out there about what the checklist is for like evaluating, who you're going to be working with. But to me, all of that stuff that comes secondary, I want to understand, hey, has somebody already taken the time to do what I'm about to do? Let me just see, like shortcut. Let me get the cliff notes, right? Tell me, does it work? Does it do what it's supposed to do? Is the marketing actually, fit reality? Or is it a little bit of a dream that's not fully there yet, right?
Right.
That'll answer 80% of your questions.
Sure. And then I think lastly, something we talked a lot about was, do they have a George Bardisi? Do they have a Ken Patterson? Do they have a Rob Ray? Is there the buck stops here type person that you can reach out to in the event of something big? You don't have to, not the one, you don't call these people all the time, but when something big happens and you need a buck stop here moment, do they have somebody like that that's on top of things, won't overpromise, but will pay attention to the issue and make sure it gets taken to resolution one way or the other? That's something that's big too. I always found that, when I was an MSP and Rob Ray was at Datto, if something wasn't working properly, and by the way, at the time they did have a few other people. It wasn't just Rob Ray, but Rob Ray's the guy that was like on social, like the minute he saw something would say, hey man, reach out. I'll take care of that. And I think that's a big deal. I think if you can find a person, make sure there's a champion at that company, someone that really cares about the experience and has some pull within the company to make sure something happens. Because I don't think you turn to social until you've exhausted there's no one at the company paying attention. They're not getting back to you and you've exhausted every possible avenue. Then you can turn to social and maybe someone will come to the rescue on that stuff. But when you find companies that have those types of people that understand what you're, understand and can empathize with you and actually care about the problem, regardless of what it is, and they're going to give an honest effort to make it better or at least fix the problem. And listen, even if it's you, if they come back, if I'm the problem and they come back to me and say, hey Ken, this was kind of on you, at least I got an answer. And having someone to be able to come back with the right expectations and be able to do that is a big deal too. And George is that guy at BVoIP, Rob Ray is that guy at PAX 8 now. I'm that guy at Taylor. Not that all our companies don't have more people that will support you along the line, but that's something I took with me when I went from the MSP side to the vendor side was, I had to be that person and make sure that I was taking care of these folks because I know how hard it is. So when you're looking, make sure you have that as well, because if you have this tool and it seems cool and you've talked to all these people and it seems great, but if something goes wrong, there's nobody to help you. That's a big red flag too.
One thing I learned in the traumas I went through, it comes from the top down. I'm not going to mention any company name. That negative activity is allowed and enforced from the top down.
You saw what Austin McCord wrote. We all read it.
No, I truly believe that. I learned that a little bit when I turned the regional center around. It comes from the top down. People it's just like a bunch of kids. Your kids act the way they do because you allow it. And it has to do with probably when you research that, I start asking now employees of the companies I'm doing business, how does the boss treat you? Because that's going to tell me how he just treats people. And I think that's very reflective on the culture. People are going to make mistakes. Things are going to mess up.
Right, of course.
But when it's entirely in the culture to just
right.
It's just like, we really don't care because you know what? I got 1,000 other ones of you.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that because my response to every issue on social, especially because people put it out to the world, was, hey, we're not perfect, but I bet you we're going to be the quickest at solving this problem. So just get with me. Here's my email, send me a message. And I worked my hardest to make sure I figured out what that problem was. And there was definitely problems. People made mistakes. But if you build your business around, yeah, that's normal. We're human. And we're going to do our damnedest to fix whatever problem it is and make sure it doesn't happen again. That's all you can do.
Yeah.
I think, and this topic has been talked about, a lot, but everybody says culture, right? Culture changes sometimes quickly, right? I mean, I know a lot's been talked about as the bankers, financiers, PEs, VCs, and investors have come into the space. It's changed things. I still think that there's a pay it forward mentality that can still be adopted no matter what. It just, is it important enough to the company to maintain that or not? And I think that really comes down to not the people who are signing the checks in the back room. It's going to come down to the people in the chairs.
Yeah.
And I think that just comes down to, do they value sales above all else? I mean, sales have to happen. We all know that. But like, guess what? The kryptonite to any subscription or reoccurring based business is churn. If you bring in 100% net new sales and you lose 101% in customers, you're negative, right? It doesn't matter. So it's very, I guess, ironic to me whenever we hear about, hey, these people have dropped, I don't know who to talk to. Like, they've cut resources. All they care about is the next 3-year contract or whatever it is. Well, the contract's only as good as somebody's is willing to pay for it. Now, you don't need Brad Gross to be on here to tell you that. You can have a contract for 50 years. If somebody stops paying on it, what's the value of them running after that person for that contract?
Right. Right. And besides, we don't need Brad Gross. We have George Bardisi.
No,
He's
I
not
only,
a lawyer. He just plays one on TV.
That's right. Yeah. Not didn't pass the bar exam, not an attorney at law, but I sure as hell know that that all that hardware stuff we talked about. Yeah, I've seen it. Pattern recognition, guys. I mean, when you get pulled over the same place every time, maybe you want to pay attention when you're driving down that highway. But no, I mean, I've heard all sorts of stories where, hey, I just got a new customer. I signed them to, a new service plan, and then they bailed on me 6 months, 8 months, 12 months in, and they still have 2 years left on their deal. Like, forget about the vendor for a second. This is MSP to customer. I mean, again, contract, it is expensive to enforce contracts. Let's be honest.
It's expensive to go to court for anything.
Yeah.
Let's just put it that way.
Not that I don't want to make sure Brad can pay his bills, but it is expensive to go down that road. So back to the word culture that Keith brought up. I guess Keith asked if they provide cigars when he signs up for new services. I don't know, but maybe that's a telltale sign that they're willing to talk shop with you. But it all comes down to, hey, there is some power. I'm going to flip for a second to this idea that, was over at Network Group, which is another peer group over in the UK. So if you're in that part of the world, check them out. Their theme is stronger together, right? So as a group, they have a better voice than as individuals of the group, right? So if 100 MSPs approach a vendor and say, hey, as a group, we have a problem, they're probably going to listen to you more than if it's just you calling in to complain one day.
Right. Yeah. And that was the whole theory, one of the big pieces with PAX 8, right? Because they're a distributor and they have a bigger voice. So if you were using them for Microsoft, who's going to have a better shot at talking to Microsoft, little old me or PAX 8, who has this bigger relationship with them? So it's similar idea, is that they have that voice. It's the same from an MSP perspective. We need things like that. We need groups like that so that we can have that bigger voice when things go wrong, which they do, because we're human and everybody makes mistakes, and some people make them bigger than others, but and maybe don't clean them up as nice. But we have to make sure we have that in place where we have a And that goes back to your networking thing, right? If you're chatting with and building groups and you're doing peer groups and you're in what we like to call business improvement groups at Taylor, you're more likely to have a little bit more power too, because you can pull these people together to get stuff done.
At some point, anyone who's creating a solution, product, service, whatever it is, does go out to get feedback, right? The problem is that the people who do take the time to raise their hand and give them feedback may be the minority, right? Maybe the people that are willing to speak up a little bit, right? But then like the rest of us that are very busy in the day-to-day of our own businesses, if you don't ever raise your hand, how are you going to affect change? I mean, I'm not trying to like, say, go create a protest somewhere. I'm just saying like somebody reaches out saying, hey, we're looking for feedback. Maybe the answer should be, sure, I can give you a half hour, whatever of my time and give you my 2 cents on what I think you're doing, whether, you should change it or not. But I don't think enough people provide that feedback either. And then you leave them up to their own design to come up with why. Well,
and that also is another either red flag or green flag, depending upon what they do with it, right? I found that the companies that ask for it, me, I'm going to give it. But if I don't hear anything back, if I've completely like leveled them on something and I don't hear back, I know right away that company's probably just doing that as we got to send out this survey, but we're not going to listen to these guys. That's kind of the mentality if you don't hear back, because most companies send that stuff out. If you put something in there that doesn't represent them well, the good ones are going to reach back out to you and say, whoa, what was this? What was your experience? Can we have more? Can we hear more? And even at the higher, the other businesses like hotels, when they do that, the good ones are going to roll back and be like, whoa, George, what happened? Why did you say that it was a complete dumpster fire? Like, could you give us some actual details on this? Right. So there's some red flags there. If a company asks you for your opinion and you give them a bad review, and you don't hear back, there's a possibility that data is going nowhere.
One of the things I learned from our hospitality customers that are really good at providing service is they're obtaining feedback throughout your stay. And 2 times after the fact, you're kind of like going like, they don't care, I'm not going to answer, or I'm too busy to respond. But one of our good clients who's a real service hotel, someone's checking on you constantly. I think that shows that that's important to them. Sometimes I think a survey is not taken for importance because it's like, this is just some automated thing that's going in a dumpster, and there's a skill to getting that feedback.
100%. And actually, George just had his event in Dallas. I'm sure you got them too, George. The hotel was sending text messages asking every day, how's your stay? Is there anything we can do?
Well, George is a high roller, but
I'll tell you, it was not, not the biggest or the, it was a nice hotel, but I'll tell you what, they did things bigger and better from that standpoint. I mean, it's a little annoying. You're like, oh crap, what do they want now? But they texted every day. Hey, we just want to make sure your stay is okay. How are things going? Is there something we can improve on?
I never get that at Motel 6.
Yeah.
Have you tried? When was the last time?
Don't say it. I knew he was going to say it. Econo Lodge. Ugh.
I mean, it worked. Maybe it wasn't the best experience.
Yeah, it worked to give me night terrors for the rest of my life.
You're fine. Come on.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Listen, Econo Lodge with cigars, it could offset.
No, I would use the cigars to burn the Econo Lodge down. Problem is the cockroaches would keep putting the cigar out.
That's funny. Well, we all know Keith Nelson likes to travel in style, but not everybody can do it his way.
Oh, I see you being the world traveler, dude.
I mean, world traveler at a budget.
I have traveled with Alec.
That's different.
That's not a budget.
Oh,
he was in the same. Let me tell you this. Poor guy. Now I'm getting him in trouble. He was in the same place as I was.
Except he didn't take a limo to the airport like you did.
That's for productivity. I've told you my math on that.
And honestly, I love your math, but my math comes from a wallet perspective, and I just don't know that I can afford to do that. But I will put it into the next budget, see if it gets approved. How's that?
You know, I think it goes into something they're talking at CompTIA a lot about the stress in our life, which I think 99.99% of it is self-inflicted. If you were to take time to prioritize and you go like, we're not saving lives here, guys. We're fixing printers. We're making sure people's phones work. Calm down. And I've always believed people want to hear you care, not that you fix it right away. You care, you're taking care of it. And so the limo thing's just part of my, do not stress yourself out needlessly.
That it depends on who you're talking to.
Yeah.
It does. Imagine you're the police officer, you're on the side of the road, you're trying to give a ticket. They gave up on those like triplicate pieces of paper that they gave you tickets on. They print them out now.
Yeah.
But now their printer's broken and they don't know how to turn it on and turn it off again. They get pretty salty. I don't know.
So what's the failover that you had in place the whole time?
The failover for the printer in the car?
I would have another printer that they just plug in, all ready to
It
go.
has to be something. I'll give you an example, like the hotel. We teach them all. The stress is the guy standing in front of you that's been delayed 9 hours. It just says, I don't give a crap about your problems. Get me in a room, right? If you get them in a room, the stress is gone. So we make sure that those people are trained every quarter on how to manually put a guest in a room.
Yeah.
I'm sure that there's a manual process. The cop can still give you a ticket.
Unless you get to the room and all your stuff's turned upside down, but that's a whole different story.
There's a man, or maybe the best thing to do is just let you go. I mean, for the right, I'm not going to stress over a printer that doesn't work. Hey, you got a freebie for speeding. Goodbye.
Yeah, there's a number one that never happens to me. So thanks for that. Number two,
George is getting no freebies.
Yeah, number two, I remember a few of the stops on the Channel Strong tour somewhere along the way where we roll into the hotel. You're supposed to check in at 4. It's 11 o'clock at night. There is no room. The room hasn't been cleaned yet. And you're like, when is it going to be clean? Like at that point, what's the point? And then I love the ones where they give you they give you a room, the computer system's down, they give you a card and you go in there and there's somebody in the room.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's someone you want to be friends with. By the way,
hardly ever works that way, Keith, but
when I took my son on his recruiting ship years ago, we got stopped doing 112 in it was an old Infinity Sport I had in Nebraska, and the guy gave me a warning and let me go.
Nebraska. Did you blame your son?
No, and actually the guy was actually funny. He said, by the way, he goes, but besides the fact you're speeding, he goes, you're in a construction zone. And he let me go.
Yeah.
I just apologized, told him that I was having to pee every 2 miles because my son was keeping me awake with 5-hour energy drinks. And he just laughed and said, slow it down. And he said, I prefer you not to, his end was great. I prefer you not to speed in my state, but at the rate you're going, you'll be out of it in 20 minutes anyway.
Yeah. Well, like to George's point, they're pulling him over for something completely different.
Yeah. No, but I think that's a part of it. You go, I think a lot of the stress comes to the fact that you haven't properly prepared your clients how to deal with technical anomalies. We all think, well, we'll just make everything 10 times redundant. You're going like, there's maybe another way to go that doesn't involve computers and cash and just help them work through those things. And that has a lot of value.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if that was going to help Southwest during December of this past year.
Well, that was deliberate. That was a choice they made when they got rid of people that were good in the business and decided to play with money. When you replace a COO that was instrumental in your whole service delivery with a guy who's a number cruncher, you're planning that. You're going to, that was like, when can this happen? Because it's not happening soon enough.
Well, there was the fact that they said that they're going to spend $1 billion to update their technology, because even their scheduler, where they didn't even know where their employees were after a certain point.
Well, yeah, and now you're going like, that's $1 billion before that ever occurred is a great investment. $1 billion after it occurred, how many people are, first of all, I hate Southwest, but how many people are going to return after they screwed you, right? So you're going like, and that's a perfect point. You're telling me there was no way for them to deal with some of those issues. They hadn't planned to. It was poor planning. You know, and it was poor service delivery.
Wow.
If you read the post from the Southwest travelers, it was, not only did I get screwed and delayed, no one cared. And that was always the answer, is like, no one cared.
Is the cared part, the people that are customer facing don't even have the control to do anything in that situation?
I don't know. I mean, we had a hotel once where the
Partially.
system was down, they
Partially.
didn't have rooms cleaned. And
Yeah.
they, you know, the owner called me up and said, what should we do? And I said, let's serve some lemonade and snacks in the lobby where everyone's waiting and take their luggage from them. And you know what? The complaint factor went down. We didn't solve the problem, but we showed we cared.
I gotta tell you, I agree that the not caring part makes things infinitely worse on these airlines when you do this stuff. And I had a flight recently coming back from Georgia's thing where they just outright, well, first they set my flight up with a 10-minute layover and a 30-minute walk. So there was no way I was making this layover. So I was panicking that night. Well, before I could even do anything, and it was Delta, by the way, Delta canceled the flight and recreated a flight, which, by the way, they gave me a direct flight, so no more layover. It was a little bit better from a standpoint, other than my schedule got a little out of whack. But I was like, that was interesting. They canceled it, rebooked it, didn't give me a whole lot of choice, but I was like, whatever. I got home, I get an email from Delta. No one ever wants to have a flight canceled, so we're going to give you 10,000 miles. I was blown away. I was like, it doesn't matter how many miles they gave, or the fact was, no, I didn't even complain, nor was I really thinking about it because I got a direct flight instead of the layover, but they canceled my flight and they knew that that could be a problem for some people, and they took care of it immediately. So you're right, Keith, having a little bit of planning and customer satisfaction and making people feel the experience or help dull the blow of a bad experience helps.
And some of the things that people tell you at the counter are absolutely stupid.
Yeah. Well, there is
computers are down. Well, they're not my computers. Why is that my problem? Right? You know, you're going like, and the fact, you look at what they did with you, which I think is the perfect example. That's almost, let's proactively prevent social media blasts because we're going to please this guy before he lets his anger out. I'm going, what a straight, and how much did 10,000 miles cost him? I mean, you're a flyer, right. So for you it did cost, but you go like, how many guys do they give it to that are never going to even use miles, right?
Right.
You're going, what a great, and how much, like that instance I give you, how much did some lemonade and cookies and have a bunch of this people take the luggage and put it in the rooms and get it ready while you, and while the room's getting clear? It didn't cost anything. All those people were standing around waiting for the check-in system or the key making system to come back online anywhere. They weren't doing it. It was free. And out of that, only one person out of like 20 people getting delayed in the office, only one person filled out a complaint card saying they were upset. Yeah,
they said the cookies were horrible.
Yeah, so you're going like, I think it's when something happens and then you just sit there and go like, you know, I don't care. There's nothing I can do, and start badmouth. You know, I had someone when I was traveling badmouth their own company. I go, boy, you're helping this. You're just using it really well.
Yeah.
Well, I think you know, they always say in sports, the best ability is availability, right? Like if you're not in a position to even get the feedback and start to put a face to it, then everything else goes out the window. So like you have to be positioned properly to actually, number one, understand, right? That when there is a problem, what is, is there somebody there to even field that, or is there just a chatbot? And we all can talk. I've been saying it, and I'll continue to say it. Where Frontier deleted their phone number and said, "Oh, you can only contact us by chatbot." And I'm like, this is horrible.
It's about empowering your people to make decisions in those situations. It's a key to and most people know I'm a Disney guy, and some of that got taken away and it started to change things a bit. But the difference between Disney and Universal was that the people you were dealing with at Universal when something went wrong were not empowered, which left them powerless to do anything. And then they didn't know what to say. And it made situations worse because it made it feel like they didn't give a shit that you were having a horrible experience. Whereas Disney, they immediately say, hey, I'm going to give you a couple free fast passes for this, for your trouble. Yeah, you can't complain.
You hit the nail on the head, especially with these guys you're talking about. I always say people go into Kmart expecting Nordstrom service. The discount doesn't matter. I mean, once when you're in a Spirit airline, whatever and you don't remember you just saved $200. All you remember is how poorly you're being treated and how they're nickel and diming you to death. And that's where I think the pricing concessions never work, because as soon as it's done, it's forgotten.
Well, by the way, Keith, they give you a discount and then they charge you for every little thing that you do on the plane. And then my main concern is when I sit in the aluminum foil chair, how am I going to be safe when that plane touches down? Because it's it's horrible. And then they charge me for my bag being on the plane. They charge me for, every little thing I did.
You could be standing.
Right.
It might next time you fly, Ken, come up front and join me. I'll get a seat next to me.
Yeah, no Spirit Air. I had one experience and it was my last. I'll walk before I fly Spirit Airlines.
Yeah, it's just not worth. When you think about that damage it does, you're on the road. You have to land at a place and be up and ready to go. People expect Ken to be, Ken, and you're going. That's why I don't think that saving money helps on a trip, because it doesn't prepare you. To me, saving that $200 to $300 actually makes your whole trip a waste, because now you're not in the right mind frame to perform at the level you need to perform. And you brought it up with Disneyland. I'd rather spend more and walk away and go, I got everything I wanted. I had a great trip.
There are lessons to be learned on all of this and how we all function in our business worlds, right? So it's amazing, everybody has a flight story. Good. There's always a bad flight story out there. I can tell you many security interaction stories that didn't go so well. But like at the end of the day, like all of these lessons can be applied to what we're doing on our side, right?
100%.
And I
it's
think
100% the fact that you're an Eagles fan.
Oh.
I have never gotten that treatment. I walked through TSA with, I told you that, a loaded clip from my 9mm, so I forgot to take it out when I went shooting. And the guys just said, oh, I'll take it, you can go through.
There might be some, there might be, I don't think you can use this analogy. It has nothing to do with the sport. I mean, come on.
I was wearing my nice leather Dallas Cowboy jacket. I think that's proof positive.
So he felt bad for you and said, this guy's already in enough pain. We're going to let him through.
I mean, honestly, I'll say that I never had TSA problems until I started traveling with George or on a George trip.
Why is that?
Eagles.
I don't know.
Eagles.
Oh, you know what? If it wasn't a absolutely like philosophical like mental breakdown, I would say I'll prove Keith Nelson wrong. I'll just go buy some Dallas thing, walk through security, get stopped, and then I'll say, I told you. But that would be a problem. I can't do that.
Yeah, I think if you did that, rubber gloves would be involved, and we don't want that.
Some people pay for that, yeah.
Yeah.
that's not a part that I did not check that as an option on my airline ticket when I checked it. Anyway, it's top of the hour. By the way, this was great, right? Sometimes it's just good to just talk through, not a specific topic, but just like in general, how are things going?
Right.
But Ken, always love to have you on. Don't be a stranger. If anyone wants to, learn more about being in a peer group, where should they find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook. I'm everywhere. You want to learn more about Taylor Business Group, you can go to taylorbusinessgroup.com. There's a ton of information there. You can email me directly, ken@taylorbusinessgroup.com. Pretty readily available because it's not just about Taylor Business Group. I really do care about the community as a whole. So if you have just general questions about being an MSP and all that stuff, I'm glad to field them.
Or if you're looking for the best karaoke joint in a particular area, then you can have a little list that he can give.
Right. I should start that list.
Yeah.
Or if you're looking for a good cigar place, ask Keith Nelson. He might have one. Anyway,
Back in the ghetto, they're in the back. I have three.
Appreciate everybody for jumping on. This session was recorded. You'll find this at mspinitiative.com. Check out the rest of the stuff that we're doing. Can't wait to see you guys on the next one. Thank you very much. Catch you later.